Yeah, so this is the last talk on this track today, so they've told me that I can talk for as long as I want. So you guys are in for like a 3-hour talk, so kick on in. We're here to talk about OSS and managing OSS in products that have already been released. So I'm a security incident response engineer. I work for BlackBerry. I've also been a software developer and a systems architect, so I've kind of seen all of the different parts of managing OSS, putting it into products, deciding what goes in. But what I do at the moment is my team is responsible for maintaining the security of BlackBerry products. So BlackBerry products are already out there in the market. We want to keep those secure and keep those up to date. What that practically means is that I spend my time looking at OSS libraries and the vulnerabilities in OSS libraries. So these are the ones I've looked at in the last month or so, and that's because I ran out of space on the slide. So it means that I get a huge amount of visibility into OSS libraries, which ones are good, which ones are bad, what makes them good and bad. And so hopefully what I'm going to do today is help you guys to make products that are more secure, so I have to do less work keeping them secure. So you can put good code into your products, and then you have to do less work keeping them up to date. So there's not really any technical details in this talk. So hopefully everyone can get something out of it. If you use OSS, if you develop OSS, hopefully you can get some idea of what your users are looking for. It can hopefully reduce your risk, reduce the cost to your company. Like, hopefully everyone can get something out of this talk. So where are we today? These are some stats I pulled off the internet. As always, all stats on the internet are false, but hopefully this gives you some idea. So the first one was a black duck scan that says, of the things that they scanned, there were an average of 257 separate OSS components, which to me is a huge number to manage. And the use of OSS is going up, not going down. This is the world we live in now. And I want to put a big disclaimer up front. I think OSS is a good thing. I'm not here to bash it. You know, the world wouldn't work without it. I think it's great. It allows us to make better code. Hopefully we can use it better than we are doing at the moment. But so I don't want to give anyone the impression that OSS is bad. Unless it does that, obviously. And just to make sure we're all on the same page, what I mean when I talk about open source is the source code is made public. Hopefully that's dodgy cable. I'm not going to talk about like if it has to be free, what licensing model they have to use. Like, I'm just going to ignore all of that. So we're going to say that anything where the source code is made public counts. And what that means is that the security risk to our companies, our products that we're making, is different than it would be in the olden days using the traditional model of closed source components. And what I'm going to argue today, hopefully convince you guys of, is that our decision making hasn't caught up. We're still lagging behind the use of our software. So our developers are doing things that we're not keeping up with. So, open source. So what's public? I said the source code is public. Actually, in pretty much every case, their bug tracking systems are public as well. So anyone logs an issue against a library, you can go and look at that. It's usually on GitHub. Some companies run their own bug tracking things, but a lot of them use GitHub. You can go and see what issues have been logged and which issues haven't been fixed. You can go and look at the old bugs. You can see what fixes they did develop. You can see what tests were run, what gatekeeping there was, what regression tests there were. All of that information is public. It's on the internet. Anyone can go and read it. So what does that mean? Well, it means that your headache is public because you're using this code. All the information about it is out there in the world. So anyone trying to attack your product has so much more information than they would have done before. Heartbleed is a great example of that. If you want to see the impact of using non-secure OSS, go and stand up a server that uses an unpatched version of OpenSSL and see how long it takes somebody to hack it. And you'll be counting in minutes, not hours, because people are just scanning the internet because all the information about Heartbleed is out there. And this isn't OpenSSL's fault. I'm not here to bash OpenSSL. That's just how we work. But it's not all bad news. As I say, we have a huge amount more information about the OSS libraries. We can look at the history, we can look at their previous fixes, we have access to their development life cycles, we can see what developers are working on, we can see what their feature versions they have in development. We can read their code, we can decide which functions we want to use. So we have all of this extra information. As I say, all of this is just out there publicly. And what this means is that we can make informed decisions. I'm not saying we are doing, but I'm saying we can do, and we should be making more informed decisions with the information we have. So the point of my talk today is to help us make a decision. And to get to the point where we're just talking about the same thing, I'm going to make a bunch of assumptions. So I'm going to assume we know what OSS is in our products. That's maybe not completely realistic. If anyone does know every single bit of software that they're using, I'd be surprised. But for the sake of argument, we'll say we know what we're using and what version we're using, which is again not realistic, and it's not trivial to find that out. But for the sake of argument, we know what we're using. We know what version it is. The library's still supported. Don't use unsupported libraries. And that we're up to date. Or if we're not up to date, we have a good reason for not being up to date. We know that the version we're using has vulnerabilities that don't affect us. Or, we're planning to do an update soon. Whatever. We are happy with the version that we're using. So once you've done all of those things, once you're using software which is still supported and is up to date, or as up to date as practical, then what else can we do? Well, at that point, the only thing you can do to reduce the risk to your company or your project is to replace your OSS. So take the OSS library that you're using, find a different one, which gives you less risk, and then replace it. If anyone knows anything else you can do other than keeping your libraries up to date and replacing them with less risky ones, please come and tell me, because as far as I'm aware, this is the only thing you can do. So, if we're going to talk about replacing OSS, you might be sitting there thinking, well, that isn't realistic. Nobody's actually going to do that. But that's not true. Or at least all the situations that I've seen, that's not true. People make this decision all the time. They might not, have a meeting, sit down, write a document saying we're not replacing our library for this reason. But that doesn't mean they're not making this decision. And usually they're going, oh, it's too hard. Or, the security benefit I'm going to get from that is not enough. But how do they know that? How do project managers know that? How are they making this decision? Well, they're going on gut instincts. They're saying, we did this before and it wasn't worth it, so I'm not going to do it again. But as I've said, with OSS, we have a huge amount of data. We should be using that data. We should be making informed decisions. So before I go on to the bulk of the talk, there are a bunch of tools out there that help. None of them give you the whole picture. And so what I'm talking about today is pulling a whole bunch of information together, but these all help. If you want to talk to me about any of these tools in particular, come grab me afterwards. I'm happy to talk about them, but for the sake of completeness, here are some things that help, but none of them give you the whole picture. So what are the factors that we want to take into account? So I've said we want to gather data. What data do we want to gather? So if you're looking at a library, a good way of assessing its security risk is what vulnerabilities has it had? What CVEs has it had? So what CVEs has it had in the past? How many does it have today which it hasn't patched yet? How severe were they? What type of issues were they? All this information is out there and is public. There are tools that will grab this all together for you. So this one plots the number of vulnerabilities per year and its average CVSS score. So, you can see that for the last few years, the number of vulnerabilities has gone down. Maybe that, gives you some confidence about the quality of the library. On average, the CVSS score was, about a 5. Again, maybe that's okay. So you can use this information to say, well, this library is, is not as risky as some other ones, so maybe that's not too bad. You can also look at how quickly the issues are fixed. So, as I said, we have the history, the bug tracking history, so we can see when an issue was raised, when a security researcher, when a pen tester came along and went, look, here is my POC for this vulnerability, and then you can see how long it was before the fix was in production. If a library consistently takes 6 months to do that, any 0 days that library gets, that you get because you're using that library, are going to be around for 6 months. Maybe that's not a great situation. So we can take all of this information into account, and we can get an idea of the health of the library. So if we have vulnerabilities, the thing that comes along with the vulnerability is a patch. So we can see the commit history for a library. Obviously, they're not all going to be security commits, but we can pick out the ones that are relevant for the information that we need. And this gives us a lot of information about the health of the project. So, are the security fixes that are getting checked in, are they the kind of simple things that we would have expected to have been done already? Like, are they just putting in null pointer checks before dereferencing pointers? Or are they, just checking for integer overflows? Are they doing that kind of basic level that we would assume a mature library would have found all those bugs by now? Or, on the other side, if the patches that are going in are capturing weird, obscure corner cases or race conditions or, those hard to find bugs, then we go, okay, this is the kind of thing that's getting patched. It probably caught all of the low-hanging fruit. This is a mature, stable library that we can trust. Because we have the patches, we can see all of the source tree, we can see which directories, which features are getting patched. And those might be the features that we're not using. So, like, if all of the security stuff, all the patches that are going in are for the feature that we don't use, the whole directory that we don't use, well, then we can say that doesn't affect us. That's good. We can see what regression testing is done, what gatekeeping there is. The last point I put on this slide is about backporting. I think this is really important. If a library develops patches and they're not able to backport it to their older versions, that gives me that makes me very nervous about that library. Is their code churn so fast that they can't backport things because the code is so different? That's generally not a very mature library. There are some good reasons sometimes, but generally if a library is changing that fast, that makes me as a user nervous about the state of that library in general. If things are being backported, they have the developer resources, they're putting the time into actually fixing things, that makes me a lot happier. So I mentioned a couple of times about code reviews. Are code reviews done? Like, when people make check-ins, is there a gatekeeping system? Do they have to be +1? What regression tests are there? Do you have to check in a unit test when you check in some new code? Do you have to have a certain level of code coverage before it's accepted? All these kind of gatekeeping and code reviews give us an idea of the quality of the library and of the maturity of that library. How many developers have to look at a piece of code before it goes into production and is in your code because you were using this library? If that's just one person, that's, going to make me feel not very happy. If there's a proper regression test, if it has to be peer reviewed, all that kind of stuff, it's going to give us a lot more confidence. So all of these things are going into contributing to our impression of the health of the library. So as I said before, we have all of the checking history, so we can see which users or which developers are checking in code. We can get an idea of the size of the team. So, is this OSS library that I've just found on GitHub, is it just one guy, sat in his garage making a product, or is this something that has a proper team of developers working on it, and is going to be, well supported going forwards? More eyes on code generally means less issues. But, we're not just going to count the number of developers. We want to look at which developers are making significant regular contributions. Just because you have 10 different people who have made a check-in doesn't mean they're all working on it the same amount. Feature owners is a big one there. So sometimes with kind of small OSS, you might have a large development team, but in reality, each developer is just working in their own sandbox, is working on their own feature. And so in reality, nobody else is looking at that code because they're the person that does that bit. And if there's a vulnerability, they're the person that's going to have to fix it. So you have a potential bottleneck there on you getting the fix because there's essentially one developer who can develop that fix for you. So, just because they have a large team doesn't mean actually that they're all working across the code base and they're all looking at each other's code. Documentation. Everyone hates documentation. Everyone hates writing documentation. But everyone loves reading documentation, right? And what I'm going to say is OSS libraries that aren't well documented generally haven't been well planned, don't have enough developer resources, aren't very mature, maybe are going to make us feel worried about the security risk they're going to introduce. So, I found this was an OSS library. Some of you might be familiar with it, but basically, it tells you how to integrate it on each of these 10 different environments, and there are proper detailed step-by-step instructions. If somebody's gone to the effort of doing that, they're properly looking after their library. They have proper developer time to do that kind of thing. It's not exciting. It's not, it's not sexy. It's not why they go into development. But if they're doing that, I'm feeling a lot more happy about the code that they're writing for me. I'm not saying that's the only way of doing good documentation. I'm not here to talk about what counts as good documentation. Like, it's a whole separate topic. But in general, I think we've all seen good and bad examples, hopefully. So, the amount of effort that's put into the documentation gives me a sense of the amount of effort people are putting into making their library good. And that's going to make me happier about the security risk that I'm taking on. Release history. So we can see how frequent releases have been in the past. And we care about security. We can look at, do they do security point fixes, or do they just wait for the next major release in 6 months or a year and then fold in a whole bunch of security fixes when they get there? And therefore, even though they might have developed a fix, it's not out in production until the next major version comes out. That's a problem for me as a user because I'm sitting there using known vulnerable code until they do their next major release. Future roadmap is also another good one. If I know that this library has like 2 or 3 future versions planned ahead, the development team is doing some planning. They have plans to support the library for at least 2 more versions, whatever that might be, 6 months, a year. The library is less likely to go out of support. So that's going to make me feel happier. So, as I say, all this information is out there. I can use this to build up my picture of how good the library is. So this use in my code, this is probably the hardest thing to quantify. And what we're trying to do here is answer 2 different questions. How likely are we to be affected by vulnerabilities? And how hard is it going to be to update our code? So I'll talk about the first one first. So how likely are we to be affected by vulnerabilities? So we've said before, we've looked at the vulnerabilities it had in the past. That might be an indication of where it's going to have vulnerabilities in the future. So if we're not using the features or the API calls that are the ones that have had vulnerabilities, well, then I don't care. Like, if I'm using a library and it has a vulnerability in a feature that I don't use, that doesn't affect me, I'm not bothered. However, if I have a big library and I only use one part of it, but it's the part that's always getting pinged by the security people, that's going to make me worried. Now, exactly how you go about doing that is not something I'm going to go into today. You can just count features. You could look at how many distinct API calls you make. You can talk about your code coverage statistics. This is a really good code coverage tool. But like in general, getting some idea of how much of the OSS library you use, and in particular which parts of it you use, is a really good idea. So when we talk about the second thing, so what I said at the beginning was, what's the question we're trying to answer? Should we replace our OSS? Now, we talked about risk. The other thing we want to talk about is how much effort it's going to be to do that replacement work. And so that's the other part of this equation. You know, if we only make 1 or 2 API calls replacing that OSS library, not going to be too bad. If every file in our code base calls this library because, I don't know, we're a crypto library and it's calling into OpenSSL the whole time, that's going to be a massive headache. So again, exactly how you convert code use into man hours and like dev effort is a topic that I'm not going to go into. But my point here is that all this information you should have, like it's not public because how you use this code is not public, but you can pull it out of your own code bases so you can get an idea of how hard it is going to be to make this update. So those are my 7 factors that I think go into judging the security impact of an OSS library. These are the things that we as users are looking for. If you know of any others, please come tell me afterwards. I'm trying to make this a comprehensive list, so if I've missed any, I would love to know. But yeah, I think these are the things that go into judging the security threat that our library is providing to us. So I said from the beginning, what we're trying to do here is make a decision. And if that decision is going to be to replace our OSS, well, then we need to look at the alternatives. But hopefully what we've done here is we have a methodology, we have a set of factors to look into, so we can run the same analysis on those other libraries. So, if I have two libraries and trying to decide which one to use, I run the same analysis, I look at the same factors, and then I can make a proper quantifiable comparison that I can defend. The last point, as I've said, is probably the hardest one, is how much effort it's going to be. But there are methodologies out there. We can come up with an estimate. And so then what you've got is a basic business decision. If I put in this much effort, I'm going to get this much risk reduction. Everybody's appetite is going to be different. Some people will tolerate no risk at all. Some people are so overworked that they have no effort to spare, and therefore they'll tolerate a huge amount of risk unless it's super trivial to make the change. So that's a decision that has to be made on a company-by-company basis, possibly on a project-by-project basis, I don't know. But my point here is that if you have data, if you can quantify both of those things, then you can make a defensible decision. You can make a good data-driven decision. So we did this example. We did this exercise. We haven't done it super in detail. I'm not going to say which two libraries it was because I haven't spoken to those two libraries, so they can't defend themselves. But we were using library X. The alternative, which provided the same functionality, was library Y. And so we looked at each of the details. And you can see that the average number of vulnerabilities doesn't actually go down that much. Like if we're only patching one vulnerability per year, that's not a big deal. But the key point was development team size. So the library on the left was basically just one guy developing a library. The library on the right was a proper team, what I'll call a proper development team. And what that meant was when we looked at how long it took patches to be introduced, the time it took for patches, for vulnerabilities to get patched in library X was like 6 months. So, researchers would come along, put their POC on this company's bug tracking system, and then it would sit there, and then eventually things would go into production on average about 6 months later. Library Y, things got patched within weeks, and then they would release a security point fix, and then the users would be up to date. So this is the kind of information where if you're just going on a gut instinct, if you're going, well, it might be too hard, I don't know how much risk reduction I'm going to get, making that decision is going to be hard. Once you have all the data, it makes it a lot easier to make that decision. So where do we go from here? So I've talked about these 7 measures. You can rate each one of these on a scale. I didn't do that in the previous slide, but you could rate each one out of 10 how much threat you think it's introducing. Then you can weight those measures, and you can calculate a risk replacement score. So what I'm thinking of here is something that looks a lot like CVSS. You can look at how many CVEs there were, how good the patches were, how many developers there were. Plug those all into some algorithm. It'll spit you out a number between 0 and 10. That's how much risk there is. You can look at how much code you're using. That gives you your risk replacement score. And as I've said a couple of times now, all this information is out there publicly on the internet. There is no reason you couldn't develop a tool to scrape the internet, pull all this information together, and do all this for you automatically. When it comes to looking at your usage of the code, you would then need to plug the tool into your code testing, your regression testing software. Obviously that wouldn't be public, but inside your organization you could do that. And so doing this is then requires no man hours at all. You can have this just running in the background. You can set your level of, if my risk reduction goes above this much for this amount of developer effort, ping me, send me an email, and then I'll make that change. And then you can automate all of this, and the hard work goes away and you get security benefit for free. We're a long way from that. If anyone wants to develop this, please do so. You'll make my life so much easier. I'm not going to steal the IP from you or anything like that. But this is where I think we as an industry need to go to make everyone's lives easier. And that's the end. If anyone has any questions, you can ask now, grab me outside, ping me an email. Part of the reason I'm giving this talk is to get feedback. So it's a selfish reason. I want people to, provide me with the things I've missed, the factors that you take into account when you're looking at OSS. So, please get in touch if you have any thoughts. Looks like there's some questions now, so go ahead.
I was just going to ask, so you mentioned the one with Git, and saying, like, this code developer, like, these files are all this code developer, like code ownership within a code base.
Yeah.
And I've heard that being talked about before. Do you know of any tools that help you visualize that say, like, these files or this subdirectory, this code owner, this person seems to be the only person committing to that? Do you know?
I don't know of any tools, no. It feels like it wouldn't be very hard to develop one. You could just look at the Git check-ins and, you can draw a directory tree. Just want to do that, and then you can color them based on how many developers is contributing to each directory. But I don't know of any tools to do that today.
Just like on some of the metrics out there, I always see that as quite difficult because what's good documentation for me as a developer would be the code I would delve straight in.
Sure.
Whereas to a complete newbie, they would expect to be sort of step through guides and those kind of things. So it's quite a subjective measure there. And I also think people try and game the system. Like with GitHub, I'll just create a whole bunch of fake accounts and I'll just have a whole bunch of people on the project committing it. So how do you protect from people gaming that?
That's a very good point. I would say if a developer is going to that much effort to game the system, it's probably easier for them to just make good code. Like, nobody makes bad code and then tries to fake that it's good.
It's a trivial thing. It's something you can farm out because if you're in competition with one of those others and you were selling support packages around your OSS, they're your competition. In some respect, like, you give away the free version, right? And then there's a support wrapper around that, which is how you make money.
Yep.
So there will be an incentive to appear higher. Obviously, something like that metric would be very good in an artifact store, like Nexus, for example.
Yeah.
JFrog, and it would score all the things out there before you embed them.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what I have in mind. And there are ways of getting the system. It didn't take you long to come up with one.
And Amazon's full of it now.
Yes.
It's a score, isn't it?
I would say that I think it's hard to do that for all of the metrics. I think ultimately it's going to be hard to completely fake that a library is better than it is. And so that's why I had, I mentioned weighting the different measures. So you might, as you said, for your use, you might not care how good the documentation is. Just adjust that weighting down to 0. The number of vulnerabilities that libraries had in the past and how critical they were, that's something you can't fake, or at least I can't think of a way of faking it right now. So that is going to be a lot harder to manipulate the metric than that one. So yes, you're right. It's not perfect, but I think there is some benefit at least to getting from doing this.
You presented this largely as a decision making between keep versus replacing something, rather than the open source model of contribution.
Yes.
Like with OpenSSL, anything that was noticed by the community at large was that there were very few contributors to OpenSSL, and after the vulnerabilities were found, lots of large organisations weighed in, committed resources to it.
So I work for BlackBerry now. The other companies I worked for in the past tend to be reluctant to contribute code that they developed as a company to OSS Libraries because there's an IP issue there. That's not always the case, and in certain high-profile, big companies have put loads of effort into that.
But then as part of you using an open source license, if you're using the open source code, you've got to publish the changes you make.
Right, so that's my point, is that companies are reluctant to make any changes at all, to put any developer resources into doing that, because they know they have to contribute them back. So they will either use the library as published, or they will use a different library as published. Now, yeah, people should contribute to OSS. I completely agree. In real world situations where I've been in my personal experience, the decisions they're making are, we're not going to spend our developer effort on improving this library. I want a quick fix. I want to reduce my threat model today. The quicker way of doing that sometimes is just to replace the library. This decision making won't be for everyone, and some people will contribute back to libraries, but having this information out there, I don't think it hurts anybody if they could see this information. Go ahead.
Do you share your assessments and retrieve back to the projects so you let us know that with?
So we don't currently. This is still quite an immature project. It's not really up and running in any serious way. We should do the vision that I have for this. That sounds a bit grandiose, but where I see this going is that all this information should be made public as well. So yeah, contributing that back to the OSS libraries. And as I said, part of the reason I'm giving this is so that OSS developers can see the kinds of things that we're looking for. They might think, nobody actually cares about documentation, so I won't bother writing any. But what I'm trying to say here is that if I'm trying to judge the security risk, that's one of the factors I take into account. So yeah, the whole point of this is to give back to the community and to help people to make more mature products. Sure.
Again, talking from a security standpoint, obviously the information you laid out is heavily reliant on CVEs. Do you have any tools as part of OSS which looks at insider threat leading to zero-day threats, right? You do have, like you said, a code review set to a developer. Working on that, how do we know that they haven't injected a malicious code which would, sit in the background doing nothing until such a day arises? But that's the wider threat I see from an open source perspective.
I don't know of any tools that do that. I'm struggling to think of how you could develop a tool to do that. If you can catch people checking in malicious code, that's that would be a massive win if you could develop something to do that. I don't know of any automated ways of checking for that. So if that's the thing you're worried about, then one of the things I mentioned is peer code reviews. So getting, two sets of human eyes to look at a piece of code. As I mentioned before, you could weight the different metrics, right? So if that's the thing that you're worried about, then you weight that highly and you say, I'm going to massively more trust code where two individual developers have looked at a code and done a code review, because that reduces that risk. I don't know of any way you can completely eradicate that or catch every instance, but I think that's the nature of the beast. Cool, thanks.